Hello, and welcome to a little forecast on the chart for the equinox, the Libra equinox point. So in the southern hemisphere, this would be our spring equinox, and in the north, it is the autumn equinox. But I just wanted to jump in a little bit about this chart, because if we start working, I don't know, it keeps doing that, sorry. If we start working with seasons and shifts in seasons, we really get this opportunity to check in with the points of the year where there is a pivot, there is a swinging across. And at the solstice points, where we have the longest day and shortest night, or vice versa, we're deep in the depths of the darkness in winter or the light in the summer, and it's at its most extreme. At the two equinox points, it is equidistant. So we are right in the middle, and it's a really good opportunity for us to kind of go, how do I regain my balance? Because this is where we can feel more balance. And of course, when you're stepping into the autumn or the spring, it'll have a different feel to it. Of course it will. One means you are stepping into the balance point that leads you down into the darkness when we're heading towards winter. And in the case of the southern hemisphere right now, we are at that pivot point that is leading us up into the light and the height of summer. But those more gentle seasons, we might want to call them, spring and autumn, where it's not as intensely hot or intensely cold, intensely dark or intensely light, are beautiful balancing kind of spaces. And what we see in the chart of the equinox point is going to give us a little bit of a flavor about how that season may go. So it's also important to look back and say, well, how did the last season go, whichever that season was for you? And seasons work in 3-month periods. They work in 3 archetypal signs. That would be one cardinal, fixed, and mutable sign. So the autumn equinox, let's just say the Libra equinox, because it's not autumn for everyone, is going to be at 0 degrees when the sun enters 0 degrees of Libra. Libra is a cardinal sign, so it'll take us through 1 month of cardinal, 1 month of fixed into the middle of this season, Scorpio, and 1 month Sagittarius of mutable beginning to shift. So we always, just before that seasonal shift, we're coming from a mutable sign. So we're coming from the Virgo season, where we're in this kind of like, okay, I'm playing between seasons, and then we step with like conviction with a cardinal sign into a seasonal shift. So Libra is a seasonal shift. Capricorn is a seasonal shift. Oh, let me just make this smaller so we can see again. Sorry, minus. There we go. Capricorn is a seasonal shift. Aries is a seasonal shift, and Cancer is a seasonal shift. Those are the cardinal signs. So here we find ourselves at the Libra equinox, and Libra itself is a sign all about balance and all about the dual aspects of self with other, not just self, and finding balance within relationships. And I think there is a lot to be said in this chart for the dynamic of relationships. I feel like that has in many ways been showing up for a while now. There's a lot of shifting and relating, and some of it's been really uncomfortable. I mean, we've just come through Venus's retrograde in Leo. She's still within her shadow period at this time. Here's Venus in Leo. And so Venus is a sign that rules Libra and Taurus for that matter. So she's in charge of this equinox. When the sun steps into her sign, she's kind of the ruler of this whole process. And she's still coming out of excavating and understanding her whole retrograde. So in the sign of Leo, where we are sovereign, we are autonomous, we have agency to make our own choices. So it's very, when we talk fire, it's me. And Venus has gone, what do I need? What do I want? What do I value? What do I value in myself? What do I not value? What values have I been hanging on to that are not mine? And what do I value in my relationships? Because she's very much about relationships, all sorts of relationships. And really we are wired for connection, and connection requires relationship. So we can't get away from relationship, and Venus has been a real shining star at the moment in terms of teaching us some of these lessons. She went from her evening star phase through her retrograde into her morning star phase, where she is at this point, still within the shadow. And she is making a happy sextile, working well with, I mean, even the word sextile, think sex, with Mars. So they are the ultimate in masculine and feminine energy, and they are making this like really good connection. You know, it's consensual. Let's put it that way. It's consensual with them. And so we're going into the season of spring here, autumn, if you're in the north, with this consensual agreement to relate in a clearer way. Now, what I actually like about this, and it's a little bit more subtle, is that you can see Venus is at 18 Leo, Mars is at 17 Libra, and bang in the middle, basically, of those 2 points is Mercury in Virgo. So Mercury is very strong in Virgo because he rules the sign of Virgo. And Virgo is about editing and details and structure. Write the list, see what works, what doesn't work, get rid of what doesn't, keep what does. You know, let's find a new kind of perfect. Sometimes that can go too far in the other direction where we get a bit pedantic. Sometimes we don't even do the thing. We're so busy procrastinating because we don't know how to make it perfect. And that's where we might have a little trickiness here. But I almost want you to think, because Mercury is our mental process. Virgo has a lot of processing. It tends to shove into the body, into the gut primarily, and process mental stuff in a digestible way. But now I want you to imagine Mercury, the sign that rules our mind and our brain and is dual in nature, right brain, left brain, is right in the middle of Venus, our more right-brained feminine energy, and Mars, our more left-brained masculine energy, and subtly imbuing this sense of Venus. Maybe you should think about how Mars is doing things and see, maybe you can be a little less judgy. And Mars, maybe you can observe Venus's body language and be a little less aggressive when she's feeling sensitive. And so there is this subtle, almost irritating, when a sign is you know, just one sign over, when a planet is one sign over, it's not always the easiest conversation. So it's like subtly Mercury, who has also just come out of retrograde and is also still in shadow, is sending the yin and yang, the Venus Mars, some energy that's saying, be cognizant of how you've been treating the other. And maybe it's time to look at self, coming back to that sort of retrograde in Leo process, and even the Mercury retrograde in Virgo. Let's just think if there's another way that we can do this. Can we metabolize relationships differently? Because maybe it's not all on the other person who's been doing it wrong. If that's your general narrative, that you always think you're right and they're wrong. Conversely, if you always think you're wrong and they're right, how can I do that differently? So I really, really love this energy moving into this next season for us, to kind of carry on what has already been coming, but in a, I don't know, for me, it feels like subtle but gentle. And actually almost like that's where the stuff starts to settle in a little bit more deeply. Because sometimes we have these big and intense things that come up and they just like break down to break through, tear us down. But then we're so busy reeling, trying to find our feet again through these things, that sometimes all we can do is survive rather than thrive. But for me, this energy is saying, well, now let's see if we can equinox, balance it out. And let's see if we can turn this into thriving rather than just surviving. And I think this is a really, really key takeaway for me from this mundane chart. There's also quite a few trines, grand trines in the sky, which is positive. There's this beautiful flow and grace to these things. One of them is including the sun and Pluto and Uranus. Now, the sun is in an air sign, but the other two are in an earth sign. So that's not an earth grand trine. It's a little bit mixed, but it's still very intense. And Uranus and Pluto are both very transformative, revolutionary, change, transform. And they're speaking to the sun, our bright light in Libra, that is the sign of relating, and saying, stuff's got to change, stuff's got to transform. So this is a little bit more of, I don't want to call it aggressive because they're trying. So it's not aggressive, it's graceful, but a little bit more active, overtly active than the conversation we just had with Venus, Mercury, Mars. So it's a little bit more active, but it's like encouraging, let's dance it out. I always think of trines as like a dance. I always think of them as like graceful. They're a Jupiter aspect as well. So they can kind of be big. So let's go big or go home. I'm ready to change the way I relate to my boss or my lover or my child or whatever. Like there is something new here. And remembering that the sign of Libra is about balance, it's about relating, it's an air sign. So it brings in a breath of fresh air if it's going well, and also a judicial sort of energy, fair and just. But it can also go the other extreme, which is judgmental. So we want to watch out for that, of course. And then the other before I move on to the other grand trine, I just want to point out that one, in fact, forms a kite with Neptune, who is sort of widely opposite the sun. So this might be a little bit of a tricky one. For me, I'm kind of thinking like Neptune in Pisces, coming to the end of its journey through Pisces, will move, I think it's next year that Neptune steps out. I'm almost certain, but I haven't got my dates in front of me. So this is an extremely imaginal space, extremely dreamy, and can be idealistic and can be also unrealistic. So we might be having the play with occasionally a feeling of, where have I been unrealistic? Where have my expectations of another been unfair? Where have my expectations of myself been unfair? Where has another's expectation of me been unfair? And how do I take the imaginal and make it real? So can I look at where I've been outside of reality to a point where it hasn't served me? And how can I go outside of reality by imagining a completely new paradigm, but then it's a positive one and one that I can act towards? Because there's also a lot of earth in the sky, which I'm loving in terms of taking action towards things. So I feel like depending on your relationship with Neptune and your own personal chart, this may impact you more positively or more negatively, depending on certain factors, because I think it can be a tricky one, this one, to be honest with you, even though it is in a happy aspect. It's sextiling Uranus, who we were talking about earlier as revolutionary and change as part of that trine, and it's sextiling Pluto, transformation and power plays. So even though it's in a good relationship to them, it's opposite the sun, the other point. So there is a little bit of discord there. And I feel like, again, depending on your personal chart, how strong or uncomfortable this planet is in your natal chart, or where it's impacting on your natal chart in this moment, might have effect there. For example, I have a sun around about this sort of degrees away from, maybe a little bit wider degree opposition from Neptune. So then I might go, well, I am a sun distantly opposite Neptune person. How does that play out in my life, and how am I feeling that? Is it strengthening me right now, or is it not? But I don't want to confuse everybody. So you have to know your chart a little bit better to look at that, or get a consultation. Okay, so that's quite an important, called a kite. And then the other grand trine is fully in Earth. So there is this beautiful promise of making something real. And I think that's really important for us all now, because we've been going through so many crazy changes in the world in recent years that are super overwhelming. And more in the last months, between my card readings and sessions I've been doing with people and the astrology of the moment as we progress, there are these moments where I'm starting to see us need to turn around and go, but look how far I've come. Yes, it's still up in the air. Yes, I don't know how it's going to go. Yes, I have no idea how that will look when it's over. But we're starting to see the steps that we're putting into place, the structures and foundations that we're beginning to build. We're starting to see the fruits of our labor. Okay, so if we bring that into the season of autumn in the Northern Hemisphere, it's harvest time. So we're starting to be able to harvest that. And if we're bringing it into spring in the southern hemisphere, we're starting to be able to see things shooting up and growth happening. So just take it for your season, because when we bring that into our own experience in nature around us, who's mirroring for us what we need to be experiencing and looking at in every season, it'll also help. So this grand trine in Earth is the moon in Capricorn, where the moon is not terribly comfortable. So she's got to do a bit of work here. We'll talk about that in a second. Mercury in Virgo, as we mentioned earlier, just coming out of retrograde, still in shadow, and Jupiter in, which he spends for about a year, Jupiter about halfway through his journey in Taurus. So Jupiter's going to make this conversation like, really, let's talk about it. He gets a bit louder and bigger because that's just how Jupiter is, but he is retrograde, which makes him a little bit more Saturnian in his energy. So he's kind of like, let's talk about it, but maybe he's got his stern voice on, like maybe there is a little discord, and he's usually known to be lucky and joyful and benevolent and all of those things, but maybe he's getting a little bit like, okay, let's really talk seriously. You know, he's pulling that in, and he's talking to the moon, who's not super comfortable in Capricorn, because in Capricorn, she really needs to drill down and get a little bit more structured. It's ruled by Saturn. And she, by her very nature, is exactly not that. she's tides and flow and changes her outfit every night. So when she has to get really like structured, it's like forcing her to stop flowing for a minute, keeping her waters still for a moment, letting her crystallize and solidify. She is about embodying the moon. She's the closest body to us, and she helps us to draw down whatever other energy is in the sky, down through her and into us. So she helps us to embody, and she has a very strong nutritive energy. In Capricorn, it's bones, it's structure, it's the skin, the hair. So she is kind of saying this is a season, whether you're harvesting for the winter and preparing for the darker months, or whether you're preparing in the springtime for growth so that you will be able to harvest next autumn time, whatever the season you find yourself in, it's very important for us to bring the energy into our bodies. These bodies, these vessels need to carry us forward. If we are having huge emotional turmoils happening, huge life changes, huge tidal waves in the world, you know, craziness happening in the world that we have to deal with, experiences that are so much more than just in our personal lives. For us to sustain our ability to cope, to grow, to thrive, we need to nourish our own bodies and look after our own needs. And so this is almost like a bossy version of that, because the moon does that for us everywhere anyway. But in Capricorn, it's getting bossy, a little bit like Jupiter's getting bossy about it. He's like, there is no more time for you to mess around with your health. There is no more time for you to put yourself at the bottom of your list. You need to come first. Your body needs to be cared for in order for you to be able to harness the emotional capacity, the mental capacity of yourself, and to consolidate, step forward with grit, determination, and follow through to create a new earth, which is really what we're all busy doing at the moment. So that's the moon's influence, and then of course we've got Jupiter saying that big conversation with it as well, and then Mercury, who we've already spoken into, has just undergone this really strong retrograde, is still in shadow, having sort of just come out of the retrograde. So now it's like, let me see, what have I thought about? What have I edited? What have I recognized were healthy? Because another thing about Virgo is routines and rituals. So what is my morning routine? And what in that morning routine is really good for me? And what in that morning routine is really bad for me? And can I cut the bad thing, or how do I mitigate that a little bit? So maybe I'm not prepared to drop coffee, but maybe I'll just have my first morning coffee and one in the afternoon, but I won't have 7 coffees through the day, or whatever that narrative is for you. Again, come back into the body. I think a lot of it is what we're putting into our body, what we're consuming food-wise, but also consuming, what are we listening to? What are we watching? Who are we following? How much time do you spend watching the news that's very fear-mongering versus reading inspirational content? Like, what is the content you're taking in? Because that's also part of our nourishment. And then, of course, physical exercise as well. What is my body asking for? Maybe I've been a super physically active person for a really long time, but maybe it's time for me to slow that cardio down. Maybe that's what's called for. Or maybe I've been very sedentary and maybe it's time to start running, something I haven't done in 20 years, or whatever the narrative is for you. Mercury's been whirling there. Mercury's been reflecting there. And now he's coming into this grand trine with Moon and Jupiter, and they're kind of serious about it. It feels like they're all a bit, there's not a lot of fun in this conversation. It's time to stick to it. It's time to be honest with yourself about what it is that you need to be vital and healthy and to thrive. So for me, a lot of this whole conversation is about thriving. And just a reminder that whole conversation was so Saturnian, and here sits Saturn in Pisces, where he's also not at his most comfortable, saying, okay, let's flow with it, you know? So it's almost like some of the planets are strict when they're usually more fun or soft, and a lot of the ones that are usually really strict are a little bit softened. So even in that, it's like a paradigm shift. So if we come back to the brain, think about Mercury sitting here with Venus and Mars, if we come back to where we began, and Mercury making these little whisper connections across to them. And it's almost like we're just going to go bloop. And what happens then? If I step into your shoes and you step into my shoes and spend a day in each other's life, will that give us perspective, take us out of judgment and into fairness and compassion? And what can we do with that energy? What can we do with compassion and love? Venus is so much about love. What can we do with that? And how do we take that love and passion and creativity and create a new earth? So I hope this has been helpful. And remember, I am also available for private readings. So check out the links below. Please continue to comment, like, share, subscribe. Help me to grow my channel and know that I'm on track helping people along the way. And then I can continue to put time into these videos. Thank you very much for your time, and let me stop the share, and have a beautiful equinox point.